Everyone on Gulliver Ridge heard the storm before they saw the girl. Wind howling through the pines, rain cutting across the cliffs. No one should have been out there. No one should have survived that climb. But from the darkness, a trembling figure, only 15 years old, soaked, bleeding, and desperate, stepped out. She didn't knock. She collapsed against the old cabin door, whispering a single plea before she died. "Please, my family's car is hanging over the canyon. They're still inside." The man who opened that door was no longer a hero, not in his eyes. Silas Rowan had buried that part of himself years ago, along with a life he could never get back. But his German shepherd, Harbor, knew better, and as the dog runs into the storm, Silas follows, straight into a rescue that will change them all forever. Like and follow the story to learn more about life, people, and faith. Autumn at Gulliver Ridge arrived colder than prophecy, a sharp breath of wind drifting over the granite cliffs with the smell of burnt leaves. But Silas Rowan had long ago learned not to flinch at the weather. He was a tall man, 45, with the kind of angular face carved by years of saltwater missions and sleepless nights. High cheekbones, a crooked nose broken once in a rescue gone wrong, and a beard that grew in uneven streaks of ash and iron. His skin, tanned from former coast duty, had turned duller during years of self-imposed exile, and his movements carried a quiet heaviness, as if each step reminded him of the weight he still carried for a family he could not save. Silas had once been an elite maritime rescue diver, fearless, decisive, the kind of man who would leap from helicopters into churning waves without hesitation. But grief had reshaped him. Losing his wife and young son in a single accident, one he blamed himself for despite knowing he wasn't there, had hollowed him out, turning bravery into self-punishment, turning purpose into retreat. Now he lived alone in a weather-worn cabin perched above a slope of pine and shale, a place where the world was quiet enough that a man could almost convince himself he no longer existed. His only companion was Harbor, a 6-year-old German shepherd built with a proud chest and deep sable coat that glimmered gold at the edges. Harbor had the steady, intelligent eyes of a dog, trained for real danger. He had served beside Silas during coastal search and rescue deployments, swimming through violent surf, sniffing out castaways in reeds, hauling life from death. Yet even Harbor had changed since the tragedy. The dog moved closer to Silas now, as if guarding not only his life but the fragile edges of his mind. That afternoon, the wind battered the cabin until the wooden walls hummed like a warning. Silas sat by the unlit fireplace, elbows on his knees, turning an old diving medal over in his hand, one of the few things he hadn't thrown into the cliffs during a bitter night of despair. His thoughts drifted the way they often did, to the ghost of laughter that once filled this home, to the scent of his wife's cedar perfume, to his son's tiny hand gripping his thumb, the morning he left for what became his final deployment. These memories had teeth. They bit every time he closed his eyes. Harbor lay curled at his feet, though every few minutes his ears twitched, alert to something beyond the human senses. Silas noticed it only when Harbor suddenly stiffened, head rising, eyes fixed on the door with a tension that snapped through the room. Before Silas could speak, Harbor lunged to his paws and let out a single sharp bark, the kind he only used in true danger. Silas stood, adrenaline rising so abruptly it made him sway. Visitors were rare here, almost impossible in fact. The nearest town sat 14 miles away down a winding, rutted road only locals dared use. No one came up to Gulliver Ridge without a reason. The knock that followed wasn't strong. It was frantic, weak fists striking wood with the desperation of someone fighting both exhaustion and fear. Silas opened the door to a gust of wind that whipped through his cabin, and standing just outside its shelter was a girl no older than 14 or 15. She had a slender, almost fragile build with long, dark hair tangled by the climb and streaked with dust and pine needles. Her skin was pale beneath the smudges of dirt, and one cheek bore a fresh scrape where blood mixed with grit. Her clothes, an oversized denim jacket, worn sneakers soaked through, jeans torn at one knee, marked her as someone not prepared for the terrain she had just crossed. But it was her eyes that struck Silas most. Wide, storm-lit, trembling with a mixture of terror and determination. This was a girl pushed beyond her limits, but still standing. "Please," she gasped, voice shredding in the wind. "Please help. Our car. My family. It fell near the canyon edge. They're stuck. They're hurt." She swayed forward, catching herself on the doorframe. Harbor instantly stepped between her and the drop behind her, stabilizing her with his body. Silas caught her before she collapsed completely, his hands steady from instinct buried deep but not lost. "Slow down," he said, though his voice felt foreign after days of silence. "Tell me exactly what happened." The girl swallowed hard, fighting to breathe. "I'm Marin Lestrell," she whispered, her chest heaving. "We were driving down the lower road. The ground gave out. I climbed the ridge to find help. I didn't know this place was here." Her words crumpled into a sob she tried to bite back. Silas steadied her again, something old awakening in him. An instinct to protect, to assess, to move. The instinct he had spent years killing, but Harbor had already made the decision for him. The dog pressed against Silas's leg, tail low, muscles taut, gaze locked on the direction Marin had come from. Warning, urgency, action. Marin looked up at Silas with eyes full of pleading. "Please, my parents, my little brother, they can't get out." Silas felt his heart clench, a ghost of another small voice flickering through him like a blade of wind. He closed his eyes for a second, 1 second of letting memory hurt, and then exhaled. "All right," he said quietly, a decision settling over him like an old uniform. "Show me the way." And as Harbor sprinted ahead into the cold wind, Silas followed, unaware that the moment he opened that door, his long, dormant purpose had opened with it. Silas moved quickly but carefully, following Marin down the narrow slope carved into the side of Gulliver Ridge, the path slick with lingering rain that clung to the weeds like thin sheets of glass. Harbor sped ahead in purposeful bursts, stopping every few yards to glance back and ensure the humans were still behind him. Silas kept Marin close, one steady hand hovering near her shoulder in case her trembling legs gave out. The girl had regained a fraction of her breath, but her thin frame and scraped cheek told him she was running on nothing but fear and instinct. The farther they descended, the more the wind shifted, pulling downhill with a damp chill that carried the metallic scent of torn earth and gasoline. Silas recognized that smell immediately. It was the scent of accidents moments away from tragedy. When the canyon view finally opened before them, the sight made Silas stop mid-step. The SUV lay tilted at a dangerous angle over the jagged lip of Cullen Canyon, a sheer drop swallowing the horizon beyond it. One front wheel clung to the earth while the other dangled above the void. The soil beneath the tires cracked slowly with each shift of weight, spider-webbing outward like veins of doom. Inside the SUV, 2 adults were pinned. One man slumped over the steering wheel, his forehead streaked with dried and fresh blood, and one woman leaning against the shattered window, her long chestnut hair tangled across her pale face. Her skin, normally warm-toned, now blanched with shock, and her breaths came shallow and rapid. In the back seat sat a small boy no older than 8, his face streaked with tears and dirt. He had his mother's hair and his father's sharp nose, but his eyes, large and moss-green, were wide with a terror that made him eerily still. Silas noted instantly that none of them appeared severely conscious, only faint responses, barely enough to cling to life. Harbor circled low to the ground, sniffing the wind, tracing the terrain with trained efficiency. When the dog halted beside a patch of soil to the left of the vehicle, tail stiff but low, Silas knew that was the path least likely to give way. The dog's instincts, honed by years of search and rescue operations, were rarely wrong. Silas crouched near Marin. "Listen, I need you to stay farther back. The soil is unstable." His voice was calm, firm, a tone he hadn't heard himself use in years. Marin nodded, though her shoulders shook with cold and dread. "That's my dad," she whispered, pointing toward the driver's seat. "And that's my mom, and my brother, Eli. Please, don't let them fall." The raw pleading in her voice sliced through something inside Silas, a memory of a smaller voice calling Daddy across an ocean of guilt he could never swim through. He pushed the thought away and focused. He approached the SUV from the angle Harbor indicated, flattening his body low across the gravel to distribute weight. Each inch was deliberate, each breath controlled. Harbor walked beside him, not ahead, as if understanding the need for perfect synchronization. When Silas reached the driver's side window, he saw the father's face more clearly. He was a broad-shouldered man in his early 40s, with thick eyebrows, tan skin, a once strong jawline now split by a bruise. His clothes, a plaid shirt and canvas jacket, suggested he was a hands-on, practical man, likely used to tools and outdoor work. A wedding ring shone faintly under the dried blood on his knuckle. His injuries were concerning, but he was breathing. The mother had softer features, round cheeks, a slender frame, olive-toned skin now washed pale. She looked like the kind of woman who spoke gently, someone who had comforted her children through storms and midnight fears. Silas reached through the broken frame to check her pulse. Steady but weak. He exhaled slowly. "They're alive," he called back to Marin, "but we need to move fast." The SUV creaked, the earth shifted. A chunk of soil broke off and plummeted silently into the canyon. Silas felt the vibration directly under his palm. Harbor growled, a deep warning rumble. "I know," Silas muttered to the dog. "Time's almost gone." He scanned for options. There was no chance of lifting or pulling the SUV to safety. Too much weight, too little ground. The only option was extraction, one by one, starting with the most mobile. The rear door was crushed but not entirely jammed. Silas pressed his shoulder to it, bracing his feet wide, and pushed. The metal groaned, warped, then shifted enough that a small gap opened. Harbor barked sharply, urging. Silas slid his arm through and touched the boy's arm gently. "Eli, can you hear me?" The boy blinked, just once, but enough. "I'm going to get you out, but you have to stay very still. Can you do that?" Eli nodded, though fear trembling in his lips said he wasn't sure. Silas wedged his fingers along the bent doorframe and forced it wider. Pain flared up his arm, years of neglected injuries reminding him they still existed. But he didn't stop. The gap grew. Harbor moved behind him, as if anchoring Silas with silent loyalty. Silas reached in, lifted Eli carefully, and pulled him free. The moment the boy's weight left the vehicle, the SUV tipped forward half an inch, enough to make Marin gasp behind him. Silas held Eli close. The boy clung to him, small fingers digging into Silas's jacket. "Put him with me," Marin called, rushing forward despite orders. Silas guided Eli back toward her, ensuring the ground under their feet was stable before releasing him into his sister's arms. With the boy safe, Silas returned to the vehicle, knowing the next extraction would be harder. Adults weighed more. The SUV groaned again as he approached. Harbor stayed even closer now, body tense, ears pinned forward. The dog's steady presence anchored Silas to the moment, pushing away the ghosts of a past he had failed. He positioned himself at the driver's side again and reached for the unconscious father. The man's legs were pinned under the dashboard. The metal had crumpled around him, trapping him in place. Silas felt his pulse quicken. This would take time they did not have. But he refused to let another family slip away, not while he still had breath. As he braced himself against the SUV frame, calculating leverage and angles, the earth beneath the front tire cracked with a sound like a snapped bone. The entire vehicle lurched forward. Harbor barked sharply, urgent, panicked. Silas froze, muscles locked, eyes meeting the canyon as the SUV slid another inch toward it. And then the motion stopped. Barely, but enough. For now. Silas exhaled through gritted teeth. "We're not done," he whispered, to himself, to Harbor, to fate. And as the wind cut harder across the canyon rim, Silas Rowan prepared for the fight to pull a family back from the edge he once fell over alone. Silas braced himself low against the slope, the cold grit grinding beneath his palms as he secured the climbing rope around a thick root jutting stubbornly from the earth. The rain-soaked ground shifted under his knees, reminding him of how fragile the entire ridge had become, but he pushed past the tremor in his chest. Fear had no room here, not if he wanted to save this family. Harbor stood beside him, the 6-year-old German shepherd's thick sable coat bristling as harsh wind slammed against them. The dog positioned himself between Silas and the open canyon, instinctively shielding him from the worst gusts. Every few seconds, Harbor released a low warning bark, his sharp amber eyes catching the slightest crumble of soil before it happened. Marin stayed farther up the incline, clutching her little brother Eli with both arms. Her slender body shook not only from cold, but from the shock of watching her family trapped and her world unraveling faster than her young mind could contain. Eli's moss-green eyes were red and swollen, tiny hands gripping the denim of her torn jacket, as though letting go would send him tumbling into the abyss. Silas crawled toward the SUV again, careful, steady, deliberate. The metal moaned beneath him, the entire frame creaking like a dying creature. The crushed door he intended to pry open was jammed so tightly that the steel had folded in on itself like paper. He reached behind him for the crowbar he had carried on missions long ago, its surface scarred, its paint stripped away by salt water and time. As he wedged the metal bar into the seam of the door, he took a moment to study the trapped mother inside. Her chestnut hair still hung across her olive-toned skin, and her breath fogged faintly against the shattered glass. She would not last long, not with the way her body slumped. Silas gritted his teeth and applied pressure. The crowbar groaned, the SUV groaned back, the ground groaned beneath everything. Harbor barked sharply again. "I know, boy, I know," Silas muttered. The door finally shifted a few inches. Enough. He pushed harder. The gap widened until he could slide his arm in, hooking around the woman's ribcage. She was lighter than he expected, slender, fragile, her body limp with unconsciousness. As he pulled her free, the SUV dipped forward, sinking another inch toward the canyon's yawning mouth. Marin gasped. Harbor whined. Silas didn't stop. He dragged the woman across the gravel, distributing their combined weight so nothing broke loose under them. Marin stood ready, fear etched into her dirt-streaked face, but she helped nonetheless. She took her mother's arm gently, whispering, "Mom, please, stay with us." Silas didn't have the luxury of comfort. He turned immediately back toward the vehicle. Only one remained, the father. He crawled closer again, the wind howling louder as if trying to shove him off the ridge. The father's broad-shouldered frame was wedged tightly beneath the half-collapsed dashboard. Blood had dried in a thin line down his temple, and his tan skin had taken on a grayish pallor. Silas evaluated quickly. The leg was pinned, but the angle suggested the bone wasn't broken, only trapped. Good. He positioned himself, gripping the bent steel with both hands. Muscles along his shoulders and back screamed in protest, reminders of injuries carried from his former life as a maritime rescuer, but he forced through the pain. The dashboard lifted just enough. Just enough. He reached down, hooked both arms around the man's torso, and yanked. The metal shrieked. Harbor barked in a frenzy. The SUV slid forward, but Silas didn't release his grip. He pulled again, harder. The father's body came free at last, and they rolled together across the dirt, just as the SUV lost its final grip on the earth. All four watched, Silas, Harbor, Marin, and little Eli, as the vehicle tipped, hesitated, and then plunged into the canyon with a groaning roar, vanishing into the darkness below. Silas lay still for a moment, chest burning, breath ragged. The father in his arms stirred slightly, alive, barely, but alive. Harbor collapsed beside Silas, panting hard, legs trembling. The dog pressed his head against Silas's shoulder, as if claiming his share of the fear and relief in the moment. Marin rushed toward them, falling to her knees. "Daddy, Daddy, please wake up." Silas shifted the man gently into a safer position and checked his pulse. "He's alive," he said firmly, "but he needs warmth and medical attention soon." Marin choked on a sob, nodding vigorously. Eli clung to her side, eyes wide in disbelief. Silas finally pushed himself upright. His muscles trembled with exhaustion, but something in his chest felt strangely lighter, like a breath he hadn't taken in years, finally found its way out of him. Harbor nudged his palm. Silas scratched behind the dog's ear, whispering gratefully, "Good boy, you kept us alive." The wind eased slightly, as though recognizing the ordeal had passed. The ridge still groaned occasionally, but the immediate danger had shifted. Silas looked at the family, 4 souls shivering, battered, terrified, but alive because fate had pushed them onto his lonely mountain. "Let's get them to the cabin," he said quietly. "It's not far. They'll be safe there." Marin nodded through tears. "Thank you. Thank you for everything." Silas didn't answer. He simply lifted the unconscious father carefully over his shoulder, muscles burning but steady. Harbor walked beside him, matching his pace, a silent guardian whose loyalty carried weight heavier than any rope. And as they ascended back toward the cabin, leaving behind the canyon that nearly swallowed a family whole, Silas Rowan understood something he had spent years denying. Saving others did not reopen his wounds. It stitched them slowly back together. The storm arrived in full force by the time Silas carried the unconscious father across the final stretch of rocky ground leading to his cabin. The rain hammered the wooden roof like fists demanding entry, and wind hissed through the tall pines that surrounded the clearing, bending their dark silhouettes into shapes that flickered like restless spirits. Marin and Eli hurried ahead, both children soaked to the bone. Marin's long, dark hair hung heavy in wet ropes around her shoulders, while Eli clutched her hand with trembling fingers, his moss-green eyes darting at every rumble of thunder. Harbor, though exhausted from the rescue, led the way with slow determination, his thick sable coat dripping, but his posture steady. The German shepherd stayed pressed close to the children, protecting them from falling branches and guiding them toward the warm square of light spilling from the cabin window. Silas pushed the door open with his shoulder, careful not to jostle the wounded man slumped against him. The cabin greeted them with the smell of old cedar, damp wool, and lingering ash from fires long past. Inside, the only illumination came from a small lantern and the fading glow of embers in the stone hearth. The space was small, one main room with a bunk, a narrow table, shelves lined with weather-beaten gear, and a fireplace that had not seen a true flame in weeks. Silas set the injured father gently on the bunk. Even in unconsciousness, the man looked rugged, thick eyebrows, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and the kind of hands roughened by years of physical labor. Yet now he seemed painfully fragile, his breaths shallow, his complexion pale beneath dried blood. The children hovered anxiously nearby, their thin frames shaking. Silas took a heavy wool blanket from a shelf and wrapped it around both of them. "Sit close to the fire," he said, his voice low but steady. Harbor immediately settled beside them, curling his large body protectively around Eli's legs and pressing his warm flank against Marin's side. The girl exhaled shakily and rested her hand on the dog's back, burying her fingers into his wet fur as though anchoring herself from drifting into panic. Silas crouched near the hearth and rebuilt the fire with practiced precision. The sparks caught on dry birch kindling, and soon a healthy flame bloomed, sending golden light dancing across the room's timber walls. As the fire grew, so did the warmth, and with it, the tension inside all of them loosened just enough to breathe. Silas checked the mother next. He laid her carefully on a thick rug near the fire. Her chestnut hair, now tangled and damp, spread across the woven fabric like strands of dark copper. Her olive-toned face remained pale, lips quivering between breaths. He checked her pulse again, weak but stable. "Your mom needs rest and warmth," Silas murmured to Marin. "You did the right thing getting help." Marin bowed her head. She was slender and shaken, but something resilient flickered in her storm-lit eyes. I didn't know if anyone lived up here. I just ran." "You were brave," Silas said. The words felt strange in his mouth. Compliments were not something he had spoken often in the years since losing his own family. But they were true. He rose and began treating the father's wounds with the small medical kit he kept from his rescue days. His hands remained steady, though his heart thudded heavily with every memory this family stirred inside him. Memories of laughter, of promises broken by tragedy, of a child he never got to save. When he finally stepped back, Marin sat by the fire, her thin knees drawn to her chest. Eli curled against Harbor, who kept licking the boy's cheek whenever he began to cry. The cabin felt alive again, filled not with ghosts but with shivering breaths and fragile hope. Silas took a slow seat on the wooden chair across from the fire. For the first time since bringing the family inside, he allowed himself a moment to simply look at them. That was when Marin spoke, her voice barely louder than the crackle of the firewood. "We were leaving our old town." Silas nodded once, wordlessly encouraging her to continue. Marin swallowed. "Mom's sick. We don't have much money left. Dad kept trying to find work, but he got laid off again." Her eyes shimmered under the firelight. He thought a fresh start might help. Silas felt something tighten in his chest. Marin continued, "We were driving through the ridge when a deer jumped in front of us. Dad swerved. The road was slippery. Then the ground just gave out." She pressed her palms to her eyes. "If I hadn't climbed up, we would have—" She couldn't finish. Her throat closed. Silas stood before he realized he'd moved. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Her small figure tensed, then eased under the warmth of his touch. "You saved them," he said quietly. "Don't forget that." Marin nodded shakily. Eli's small hand came to rest over hers. The fire popped softly. Outside, rain still hammered the roof in relentless waves. Silas glanced toward the bunk where the father lay. He studied the man's lined face, the strength carved into it, the way life clung to him despite everything. It reminded him painfully of how life had not clung to those he lost. He turned away, gripping the back of a chair, until his knuckles whitened. Harbor rose slowly and padded to Silas's side, leaning his weight into the man's leg. The dog looked up with those loyal amber eyes, the same eyes that had stayed with him on the worst night of his life, when the sea had taken everything but him. Silas inhaled sharply and knelt beside Harbor, resting his forehead against the dog's. "We did what we could," he whispered. Harbor licked his chin once, a small grounding gesture. Marin watched them quietly. In the flickering glow, she saw not the isolated mountain man she first feared, but someone carrying invisible wounds deeper than any canyon. "Silas?" she asked softly. "Why do you live all the way up here?" Silas stiffened. His breath caught. He opened his mouth to reply, but only silence came out. Silence heavy enough to answer the question on its own. Marin lowered her gaze, sensing she had stepped onto a fragile part of him. "It's okay," she murmured. "You don't have to tell me." Silas exhaled slowly. The storm raged on, but inside the cabin, the fire crackled, warming skin and shadows alike. And for the first time in years, Silas Rowan wasn't alone in the dark. Morning came gently over Gulliver Ridge, as if the storm itself had grown tired of shouting. A pale silvery light crept through the cracks of the cabin shutters, stretching across the hardwood floor like quiet hands trying to wake the house without disturbing those inside. The scent of damp pine drifted through the small gaps in the walls, mixing with the fading fragrance of smoke from last night's fire. Silas stirred first. His tall, angular frame felt heavier than usual, not with exhaustion, but with the unfamiliar warmth of having people near him again. For years, the cabin had woken to silence, broken only by the soft padding of Harbor's paws or the lonely whisper of the wind slipping down the ridge. But this morning there were new sounds, a soft murmur, a child's sleepy sigh, the gentle huff of Harbor breathing deeply where he lay curled beside Eli. The German shepherd's thick sable coat gleamed slightly where the firelight had dried it overnight. Eli, a small boy with moss-green eyes still puffy from crying, had fallen asleep with his head resting against Harbor's ribcage. The dog hadn't moved an inch, as if afraid any motion would break the fragile peace. Maren slept nearby, her dark hair spread like ink across the wool blanket. Her slender figure rose and fell in slow breaths, calmer now that danger had passed. Their parents lay on the bunk and rug, still recovering but stable. The father's rugged features looked less strained, his once lined forehead now relaxed. The mother's olive-toned skin was warmer, her chest rising in steady rhythm. Silas watched them for a long while, leaning against the edge of the stone fireplace. His beard, streaked with ash and iron, caught the faint glow of morning as he rubbed a tired hand across his face. Something in him had loosened during the night, something tightly wound with grief and guilt for far too long. He didn't know what to call it. Relief? Redemption? Maybe just breath, real breath. For the first time in years. A small yawn echoed. Maren blinked awake, rubbing her eyes as soft light brushed across her cheeks. When she noticed Silas standing there, her lips curled into an exhausted but grateful smile. "Morning," she whispered. Silas nodded. "How are you holding up?" She looked toward her parents and brother, then back at him. "Better, because of you." Silas shifted his gaze. Compliments, gratitude, those were things he had forgotten how to accept. But today they didn't sting as sharply. A moment later, Eli woke and sat up slowly, still leaning against Harbor. The dog stretched, shaking out his fur, then gently nudged the boy with his nose. Eli giggled, a small, fragile sound, but a sound that filled the cabin with life, nonetheless. Silas knelt to check the father's condition again, pulse strong, breathing steady. The man's eyelids fluttered slightly before settling back down. He was healing, just slowly. "You contacted the rescue team, right?" Maren asked. Silas nodded. "I sent a radio signal at dawn. They'll follow the north trail up here. Shouldn't take more than an hour." Maren exhaled in relief, her shoulders softening. The cabin fell into a comfortable quiet as they all waited. Harbor sitting by the doorway, alert and proud. The children huddled in their blankets, the storm-wounded parents slowly regaining strength. Silas kept his eyes on the window, not watching for the rescue team, but watching the ridge as dawn finished washing away the night. The same ridge he had once cursed, the same ridge he had once chosen as his exile. Now it looked different, not kinder. Its cliffs were still sharp, its winds still brutal, but somehow less empty, somehow alive. He didn't notice Maren stand until she was beside him, her small hand holding tightly to a corner of the blanket. The firelight softened the edges of her face, revealing the exhaustion of a girl who had carried more fear than any child should. "Silas?" He looked down at her. She swallowed, gathering courage. "Before we leave, I want to say something." Her voice trembled, but it wasn't fear this time. "You didn't just save my family." Her eyes shone, bright and earnest. "You saved me from losing hope in people. I thought no one would help us. I thought the world didn't care anymore." She paused, pressing her lips together. "But you cared, and that's something I'll never forget." Silas held her gaze. Those words pierced places inside him he had tried to board shut for years. He wanted to speak, but the right words felt too heavy, too tangled. Before he found his voice, Harbor trotted toward him with the rope Silas had used during the rescue dangling from his mouth. The dog nudged Silas's hand with it, insisting he take it. The gesture made Silas smile faintly, a rare, quiet thing that softened his stern features. He crouched and tied the rope neatly, giving Harbor a gentle scratch behind the ear. "You did good yesterday," Silas murmured. "Couldn't have done it without you." Harbor pressed his head into Silas's palm, tail flicking once. Marin watched them, warmth rising to her cheeks. "He really loves you," she whispered. Silas swallowed, his voice barely above air. "I don't deserve him." Marin frowned gently. "I think you do." Before Silas could answer, a distant rumble echoed through the trees. This time not thunder, but engines climbing the trail. The rescue team had arrived. The children rushed to the window. Harbor barked once, alert, but no longer tense. Silas stepped outside into the crisp morning air. The sky was washed clean, painted in soft strokes of peach and pale gold. The ridge glowed beneath the newborn sunlight, every stone catching the light, like a promise. Behind him, the cabin door opened. Marin stood there with her family, the father now semi-conscious, leaning on the mother, both wrapped in blankets. Eli held Harbor's fur like it was a lifeline. "Silas," Marin whispered one last time, "thank you for everything." He nodded, unable to form anything more. His throat tightened, and as the rescue crew approached to take the family to safety, Silas felt something in him shift, subtle but unmistakable. The empty space inside him remained. Grief never vanished entirely, but now there was something else beside it. Something warm, something steady, something like a path back toward who he once was. And Silas Rowan finally understood. Harbor had not led him into a rescue, he had led him home. Sometimes in the coldest seasons of our lives, we believe we've been abandoned, that the darkness will never lift. But in those very moments, God often sends us his quiet miracles. A stranger appearing at the right time, a detour we never expected, a loyal dog refusing to give up, or a trembling voice calling for help. Not to test us, but to remind us that he still sees us, still hears us, and still places the right people in our path when our hearts are about to break. Silas thought he had lost everything, but God placed a frightened girl on his doorstep and a faithful German shepherd at his side to guide him back toward the light he thought he'd never feel again. Through that moment, a family was saved, and so was a man who believed he had nothing left to give. That is how God works, quietly, gently, through ordinary hands and unexpected encounters. Miracles don't always shout. Sometimes they whisper. And as you return to your own daily life, with its aches, worries, and long nights, remember this: God has never been far from you. Your miracle may be closer than you think. It may come through a person, a moment, a message, or even a loyal four-legged friend. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us, what miracle has God placed in your life? And if you'd like more stories of courage, faith, and second chances, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us share more light in a world that desperately needs it. May God bless you, your home, your family, and your journey ahead. May his peace rest upon you, and may his miracles follow your steps.